Would you be able to maintain control if you were treated as invisible by your own family, even knowing that your life depended on decisions that no one there would have the courage to make? I have been ignored at the dinner table. I have heard jokes about my career in the army. I have endured every look of contempt without revealing what was really at stake. No one knew that, behind those criticisms, I was responsible for a billion-dollar contract that could change everything for them. What seemed like just another normal night became the moment when everything was put to the test. My history, my achievements, and even my value within that house. But before I tell you how everything went down that night, you need to understand who I really was and what made me put up with every provocation up until then. My name is Samantha Harper. I was born in Austin, Texas, on September 28, 1995, to Michael Harper, an engineer, and Catherine Bennett, a biology teacher. I grew up in a typical middle-class neighborhood, the kind where neighbors leave notes on the door at Christmas and complain about each other's dogs on Saturday morning. My earliest childhood memory is of my father's backyard full of toolboxes and the strong smell of fresh paint. Every time my mother did some renovations in the house, which was almost every month. My family has always been the kind of family that values diplomas on the wall, resumes with important positions, and that dinner table conversation revolved around office reports, Pinnacle Defense Systems stocks, and the performance of Dylan, my younger brother, who has always been the pride of the family. He was born 2 years after me, and since he was little, everyone called him a prodigy. At 11, he was already building robots in the science club. At 16, he joined the junior program at my father's company, and every birthday, he would give an emotional speech about the brilliant future that was expected of him. Meanwhile, I grew up learning to do things on my own that no one else would look at, from fixing the washing machine to running to pick up my mom after a bad day at school. I was an average student, the kind who preferred chemistry lab to a crowded classroom. My only grade was in military history, and I never took that habit of taking an interest in subjects that no one in my family thought were important very seriously. My room was the opposite of the house, cluttered, filled with old books, headphones, and scribbled on scraps of paper. It had a bulletin board of school photos, magazine clippings about UN peacekeeping missions, a high school ROTC pin held together with duct tape, and, in a shoebox, letters my grandmother sent me from Houston, always with a message telling me never to settle for less than I deserved. It was from her that I inherited my stubbornness, and maybe a little bit of my own will to do things my way. At 18, I made the decision no one expected. I applied to West Point. There was no speech of support or party at home. My father thought it was a teenage tantrum. My mother just asked if I was having trouble. Dylan looked at me like I had lost my mind. Deep down, no one believed I would last more than 6 months. On the day of my graduation, only my grandmother appeared in the audience, holding a handwritten sign. My career in the Army began on July 1st, 2013. It was 4 years of adaptation, all-night training, dozens of simulated missions, and that constant feeling that no matter how hard I worked, they would always expect me to give up. I specialized in cybersecurity, learned how to deal with defense systems, encrypted networks, emergency protocols, and all that technical language that seems indecipherable to anyone who has never had to protect Pentagon data in real time. With each exercise, my responsibilities increased. I became a reference in rapid response operations to cyber attacks, participated in groups that developed containment plans for external threats, and was appointed, in 2019, to a mission in partnership with NATO. In the Army, routines were measured in minutes. Each shift had an objective. Each meeting involved codes, reports, and quick decisions. I learned to identify risks in seconds, to make decisions under pressure, and to trust the people around me. There was no room for ego or improvisation. I collected small scars, cuts from network cables, burns from hot coffee, bruises from nighttime exercises. With each new mission, I felt like I was building an identity that no one outside that environment could understand. When I was promoted to lieutenant colonel, I was presented with my silver badge in a nearly empty office. That day, I stared at my phone, waiting for a message from my family. All I got was my grandmother, asking if I was still eating properly. I became known for solving problems that others avoided, taking responsibility for other people's mistakes, and never letting a security alert go unchecked. The name Harper on my uniform drew attention, but to most of my colleagues, I was just Sam, the only one who wasn't afraid to defy command when the situation called for it. I returned home in June of 2024, after almost 5 years without a vacation, with my luggage full of medals, certificates, and confidential reports that no one had ever seen. The neighborhood was the same, but I felt like I was carrying a different weight on my shoulders. That Sunday, June 23rd, I left my suitcase in my old room, put on my dress uniform, and went down to the dinner that my mother had prepared as if nothing had changed. The smell of roast beef mixed with cheap perfume, the table was set with antique silverware, and Dylan's graduation pictures were prominently displayed on the living room wall. I sat at the head of the table, where my grandfather used to sit. The first few minutes were spent making small talk, stock market forecasts, comments about Dylan's latest trip to New York, compliments on Pinnacle Defense Systems' new line of drones. My father asked about the company's projects, completely ignoring the uniform hanging on the back of the door. My mother poured white wine, worried about the amount of salt in the food. That night, I looked at each of them and realized the chasm that had been created. My world was made of codes, systems, and emergency protocols. Theirs was made of charts, actions, and board meetings. Every time someone asked about my work, I changed the subject, diverted to some news story about Dylan, or started a conversation about the neighbor's dog. I laughed, feigned custom, but I remembered each silence like an invisible mark. What no one knew was the size of the contract I had signed days earlier, nor the responsibility of being the direct liaison between the Pentagon and Pinnacle, controlling every detail of the largest project ever developed by my family's company. But at that table, I was just another guest. I already felt that something big was about to happen, but I had no idea of the impact that dinner would have, and everything that came after, no one could have ever predicted. It was April 22nd, 2024, when I walked through the glass doors of Pinnacle Defense Systems. The lobby was crowded, the air was filled with muffled voices, the smell of burnt coffee and expensive perfume. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to see anyone in uniform, much less a colonel. I could feel the eyes on my left shoulder, right above my silver insignia, and for a second, the hubbub died down to near silence. My boots thudded loudly on the polished floor, each step seeming to signal that something out of the ordinary was about to happen. Across the room, I saw my brother, Dylan Harper, holding the microphone, interrupting his speech in the middle of a slide about the company's new cybersecurity system. He froze the moment he recognized me. His face drained of color, and even his practiced smile disappeared. To his right, my father, Michael Harper, was adjusting his suit jacket, unable to hide his discomfort. My mother, Catherine Bennett, stood still, staring at me as if I were an unfinished memory. Jessica Lynn, the CEO, looked up from her tablet and stared at me with an unreadable expression, curiosity and apprehension all at once. I continued walking to the center of the lobby, feeling every person in the room trying to guess who I was and what I was doing there like that. The white light from the ceiling reflected on the metals and silver bars, and suddenly the entire scene seemed to revolve around that moment. No greetings, no waves. The mood changed, as if everyone felt they were about to see something out of the ordinary. I didn't say anything. I just stopped in front of the main table and stared at each of them. I didn't need to explain anything else. Just being there, in that uniform, in front of the family and the company that never believed in my path, had already changed the script of that event forever. But what no one there knew was that that scene was just the beginning of the chaos. Now I want to see, if you were in that room, would you have faced that room or would you have preferred to retreat? Write in the comments. I want to know what would have gone through your mind if you were there, under all those eyes, knowing that no one expected anything from you. And the most impressive thing is that I still had no idea what was about to happen. 6 months before that morning at Pinnacle, the last thing on my mind was wearing that uniform again in front of them. I arrived home after 5 years of not showing up at the gate, suitcase on my back and my head heavy from the night flight. It was November, cold in New Jersey, overcast skies, and that smell of old food mixed with fabric softener that only exists in family homes that never change. The gate creaked the same way it always did, only now it seemed harder to cross that yard, as if I were a guest and not a daughter. I already knew that no one was waiting anxiously. The atmosphere was routine, people who had grown accustomed to not counting on my presence. My mother, Kathy, opened the door with that automatic smile she uses for annoying neighbors. "We thought you were only coming for Christmas." I just dropped my suitcase in the corner and tried to hug her, but she was already turning to turn off the oven. My father, Mike, didn't even move from his armchair. He just made a vague gesture, waving at the newspaper in his hand. The TV was on low, the news reporting unemployment statistics. The only one who really smiled was Dylan, coming down the stairs in a dress shirt, his hair combed like a photo in an ad. "Private Harper showed up," he joked, but I knew that for him, everything was a competition. I sat at the table trying to make conversation with a long time no see, but no one really wanted to talk about the past. Dylan quickly brought up the subject that everyone there wanted to hear. He smiled broadly, twirled his glass in his hand and said, "Next week I'll be taking over as director of the Special Projects Department." My father clapped his hands proudly, and his mother made an impromptu toast, with that sparkle in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. "See, Samantha? A real career. Dylan is growing without needing a uniform." The sentence came out dry, between one bite and another, as if there was no poison in it. Dylan didn't even look at me. He continued his speech about contracts, business trips, and meetings with CEO Jessica Lynn. My father, excited, praised his son for 20 minutes straight. "This is the future of the Harper family. People who think big don't get stuck in a medal-winning past." I listened to everything without blinking. I could remember my last promotion ceremony at Fort Meade. I was appointed colonel, with a speech, a military band, and the presence of important people from the Pentagon. I invited my whole family. They thanked me but didn't go. My father texted me saying that I couldn't miss work because of a badge change. My mother didn't even respond. At dinner, Dylan mentioned his busy schedule. "Closing week? Can't go." I sat there, pretending that the smell of food in the oven and the worn-out armchair were still part of my history. Halfway through dinner, my mother teased me again, picking at the salad. "Don't you think about getting a real job, Sam? Everyone here has built something. How long are you going to play war?" My father, between bites, didn't even take his eyes off his plate. "Nobody cares about medals here, Samantha. We want to know about the real future." Dylan raised his glass, smiling at the mirror in the living room, pleased with his own reflection. It felt like sitting outside, watching a play in which everyone already knows their role, and there's no room for improvisation. No one asked where I'd been, what I'd been through, or mentioned the letters I'd stopped sending because they never got a reply. I was just a detail at the table, someone who came back out of obligation. The night ended as it began, in silence. My father turned off the living room light before I even went upstairs. Kathy said a half-hearted goodnight, as if she were signing off. Dylan left talking on the phone without looking back. I sat in the darkness of my old room, my suitcase still closed in the corner, wondering what else I needed to do to be noticed. And there, in that house, it became clear that no matter how far I went, for them, I would never leave the same place. But that was still little compared to what was to come. Stories like this bring us together because they remind us of what really matters. No one forgets what it's like to fight for recognition. Like now and join this group that understands the weight of every word said, or ignored, in the family. Here, every detail experienced makes a difference. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories that defy logic and shake our certainties. And it was only after that night that I began to realize the size of the chasm between who I was and who they saw. What happened next made it clear that I still had no idea what it would take to change everything. The first memory that came to me was of a September afternoon in 2012, when I was 18, sitting at the kitchen table while my mother listed all the internships Dylan had gotten at Pinnacle. She spoke without pausing, proudly, and asked if I had sent my resume to Dad's HR department. I said no, that I was going to take the exams for West Point Military Academy. Silence was immediate, the kind of silence that hangs heavy in the air, but no one acknowledges. My father looked like he's heard a bad joke. "That's for people who can't get into real college, Sam," he said. Dylan chuckled softly. already preparing the papers for the next interview. There were months of sidelong glances, unsolicited advice, and insinuations that this phase would pass. But the phase didn't. I joined the gym in the fall, cut my hair to shoulder length, and went to the base without looking back. The letters arrived full of cold messages, with no questions, just notifications. Your brother signed a contract with a company in Israel. Everything is the same here. It's just you who doesn't know what you want yet. But inside, the story was different. The first few weeks were a struggle. Running before sunrise, code on a black screen, instructor shouting in your ear, uniforms sticking to your skin from so much sweat. Many people gave up before the end of the first month. All I could think about was not giving them that pleasure. In 2015, I was assigned to the Cyber Defense Command. My first mission, no one in my family knew about it. I stayed awake for 3 days straight, monitoring a real cyber attack against power systems on the East Coast. My hand was sweating so much on the keyboard that I had to ask someone to hold my coffee. I received a direct compliment from the commander, a mention in my file, but no one at home knew. I went back to base, fell into bed exhausted, and responded to my father's email with the automatic phrase, "Everything is fine here. Busy week." He responded 3 days later, "Your brother won another innovation award." The following year, I spent 3 months on a mission abroad, monitoring communications networks at bases in Eastern Europe. I gained recognition from General Teresa Boyd, someone who doesn't praise people for nothing. In the middle of winter, she came into the room, asked everyone to leave, and it was just me and her. "You have the discipline and coolness to hold on longer than you let on, Harper. Keep it up." I memorized that phrase because I'd never heard anything like it at home. Meanwhile, in the family room, the walls were filled with Dylan's certificates and trophies, photos from events, and newspaper clippings. Whenever I appeared in photos at home, I was someone with my back turned or with my face half cut off, always in uniform, never in a suit. One Christmas, I came home from leave and was in the middle of a party. My brother was giving a speech with his father, toasting his new position. My mother was taking pictures for the living room board. I went through the kitchen, left a present on the tree, and watched from the door. No one noticed. I went to sleep with the noise of the celebration in the living room, already accustomed to being an extra. I preferred to keep everything I achieved at the barracks, in the medal vaults, in the email files exchanged with colleagues who also hid their achievements from families who didn't understand. When I was promoted to major, I sent an invitation to the ceremony. My mother replied, "Nobody here understands these formalities, daughter, but good luck." When I called to tell him, my father changed the subject in less than a minute. Dylan just sent a rocket emoji. I decided to stop telling, to keep to myself what was worth it. In the barracks, no one cared about the last name Harper. All that mattered was what you really did, who you could protect, how much you could handle without losing focus. I discovered that there, even though I was invisible to them, I was finally building something of my own. Every mission was a secret. Every promotion was a reason for silence at home. Even General Boyd's messages congratulating me on my performance were deleted from my phone to avoid questions. Meanwhile, every victory Dylan won brought me a special dinner, a photo on the mantelpiece, congratulations from neighbors. I became an expert at not showing up, and that's how I learned to live like someone who carries a password, visible only to those who really want to see it. I thought that hiding was the price to pay for not losing the little family I had left, but I was wrong. The weight of this silence would only become clear years later, when I understood that nothing can be buried forever. The meeting was scheduled for Friday, April 28, 2023, at my parents' house in the suburbs of Arlington. It had been over 5 years since I'd sat at that table, and to be honest, I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt like I belonged there. I arrived early, trying not to slam the door so as not to attract attention, and was greeted by the strong smell of freshly baked lasagna and loud laughter coming from the living room. It was Dylan telling yet another story about pivotal meetings at Pinnacle, his voice soaring as if he were on stage. My mother was busy setting the table, aligning the silverware with the precision of someone trying to control everything around her. My father was already waiting at the end of the table, cell phone in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other. He barely looked up when he saw me. "Samantha, you look like you haven't slept in days. Military life must be a piece of cake, right?" he said, already setting the stage for the usual jokes. My mother took the lead and said, "Oh, honey, at least the uniform makes you look elegant. Much better than lying around like some people out there." The laughter came quickly, sharply, without caring if it hurt. The worst part was that no one there realized that these jokes were, in fact, just another form of contempt. Dylan was the center of the conversation as always. He talked about Pinnacle's new digital defense project, describing meetings with investors and tight deadlines, every detail pointed out with pride by my father. Dylan led the integration of the Orion system. Now he's the industry leader. Everyone wants to know how he managed to close that deal in less than 30 days, Mike would say, inflating my brother's ego even more. My mother would add, "That's what we're proud of, you know? Seeing someone charting a solid path, a real future, not flying around without a plan." They didn't even look in my direction, as if the chair in front of me was empty. I ate in silence, chewing slowly so I wouldn't have to open my mouth. I looked at the suitcase left in the hallway. I knew that inside was the colonel's freshly ironed uniform, with the insignia shining under the artificial light. It was there, amid the noise of the dishes, that I realized how much that hurt me. It wasn't just the disdain or the comparison, it was the weight of years trying to prove that being a soldier wasn't a failure. I knew the value of each sleepless night, each grueling exercise, each mission that didn't fit into a presentation speech, but no one there had any idea. Between sips of wine, Dylan began to talk about a business trip he was taking to Seattle. My father asked for details, wanting to know the names of clients, delivery times, profit margins. My mother smiled, making plans to visit the city, already imagining herself telling her friends at the club. When the conversation got more lively, someone remembered the invitation to my promotion ceremony. "Nobody cares about the medal here, Samantha. We want to know about the real future," my father said, adjusting the gold watch on his wrist. It wasn't a joke. It was just a reminder that in that place, recognition had a different meaning. I gripped my fork tightly, forcing a smile. I wanted to answer, but I swallowed it all back down. I looked at my mother, hoping for some sign of empathy, but she looked away, preoccupied with a bowl of rice. My brother didn't say anything, just fiddled with his cell phone while everyone waited for the next topic to continue the party. I felt a pang, not the kind that goes away with time. It was the realization that, in that house, my achievements remained invisible. The harsh comments, the tasteless jokes, everything served to reinforce that I was never the source of pride. Only the uniform cloth forgotten in the bag seemed to understand how much that hurt. At that dinner, I realized that no medal, no commendation from a general, no report approved by the Pentagon would change my parents' view. They preferred Dylan's achievements, always aligned with the family's interests and the brilliance of the family name. I looked around, taking in every detail of that environment that had once welcomed me. The paintings on the wall, the old photos of Dylan receiving awards, the trophies lined up on the shelf, everything was a reminder of a pride that I had never felt. I felt my hand sweat again, my fingers marking the handle of the fork. I took a deep breath, trying not to show what that was causing me. I finished dinner in silence, cleaning my plate and waiting for time to pass. I wanted to leave, but I stayed, as if waiting for one last chance to be seen. But at that moment, I understood that, for that family, I was just another extra. And that's when I realized that the open wounds there weren't going to close on their own. I hadn't seen the real trigger yet, but it was coming, faster than I could have imagined. The Pinnacle Defense Systems auditorium seemed like a different universe from my parents' house. There were cool lights, spotless carpets, the blue and silver logo emblazoned on 10-foot banners, and rows of chairs filled with executives, investors, and employees in formal attire. Dylan was already there, with the rehearsed posture of someone born for that stage. On the screen, colorful graphics, words like innovation, safety, and leadership jumped out at you, but nothing there prepared anyone for what was to come. The last time I stepped foot in that building, I didn't have a rank yet. I just had the desire to prove my worth. Now, as I crossed the lobby with my uniform in order, the insignia shining on my left shoulder and my military badge hanging, each step felt like an answer to everything that had been said and not said over the years. Eyes turned. People who had never really noticed my presence stopped. Some whispered names. Others tried to guess what a military woman was doing there in the middle of that corporate celebration. In the first row, Jessica Lynn, the CEO, maintained her usual calm expression, but her gaze gave away that something big was about to happen. Dylan stood center stage, finishing a technical explanation of the Orion system integration. He held the microphone steady, ready to gather applause. But the silence grew awkward when I walked in. My father and mother stood side by side, both of them frozen in their smiles, trying to make sense of what was happening. I saw the moment Dylan froze, losing his train of thought. The screen behind him stopped on a slide of the Pentagon, the symbol slowly rotating, as if it were part of a larger plan. Jessica stood up and drew attention to the stage. Her voice rang out clearly over the PA system. Before we continue, I want to introduce someone who represents more than any contract or innovation we've shown you so far. This is Colonel Samantha Harper, the Pentagon's official liaison on this $1.2 billion contract. The microphone picked up the utter silence. There was no immediate applause. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the auditorium. My father's face went pale, his jaw clenched. My mother couldn't hide her shock, and Dylan lowered the microphone, looking at me as if I were someone else. It was only then that it dawned on everyone. The person overseeing the most important project in the company's history was not a career executive, but their troubled daughter, the one they were almost embarrassed of at Sunday brunch. Jessica called me to the stage. I felt my palms sweat, but I went up without hesitation. The uniform was not a shield. It was a statement. When I stood in front of the audience, I saw former classmates from school, old acquaintances of my parents, even directors who had previously ignored invitations to my military ceremony. All of them there, in silence, forced to admit that they had missed something huge before their very eyes. Jessica continued, "Colonel Harper is not here just as a military representative. She has final authority over every step of this contract. Nothing goes forward without her approval." It sounded like a sentence. Dylan couldn't hide his frustration, gripping the remote control so tightly that his hands were shaking. My father looked down at the floor, searching for a way out. My mother stared at me, her face hard, as if she still hoped there was a mistake. There, for the first time, I took center stage. I explained the Pentagon's role in a simple, straightforward way, explaining the need for integration between civilian and defense technology, and quickly detailing the importance of cybersecurity in times of real conflict. I spoke while looking at Dylan, my father, and, most importantly, at everyone who had always doubted me. It wasn't a speech of revenge. It was simply recognition of what had been achieved outside the family spotlight. The first few applauded slowly. Jessica gave me a knowing look. Old colleagues began to realize that beneath the uniform there was more than a story of overcoming. There was competence, results, real leadership. For the first time, I found myself being looked at with respect, not only as a soldier, but as someone who had turned contempt into results. As the applause rang out, Dylan stood frozen, processing everything. My father adjusted his jacket, trying to maintain his posture, but his eyes couldn't hide the discomfort. My mother whispered something to him, but the sound was drowned out by the din of the auditorium. In that moment, it was clear that the entire silent hierarchy of the family had been turned upside down. The contract was just the beginning. The real impact would come later, when the masks fell and no one could pretend they hadn't seen what had always been there. I knew that after that night, none of my family would go home the same. The pinnacle event was the trigger no one expected. But what came next, no one was prepared for. The meeting room on the 6th floor, just above the auditorium, seemed designed to keep intimacy at bay. It was all glass, with too much white light and a long, cold table. When the door closed, the sound of the event below disappeared, leaving only the noise of the air conditioning vents. Mike entered first, his tone already heavy, and he didn't even try to hide his discomfort. "Is this what you planned? A show in front of everyone to try to show yourself bigger than you really are?" The sentence came straight out, with venom, and no one tried to interrupt. Sam leaned back in his chair, dropped his military cap on the table, and stared at his father without looking down. The uniform still marked his arm, but something else was weighing on him now. "Do you really think I wanted to come here to embarrass you?" I spent 5 years listening to you say that what I did was worthless. No one ever asked if I was okay, if I was scared, if it was difficult. All that mattered was whether Dylan was delivering the results you expected. His tone was firm, but his hand clenched on his leg showed that it was control, not coldness. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the usual awkwardness of the family pretending that everything was fine. It was a vacuum, as if no one knew where to look. Dylan tried to lighten the mood, but his voice was weak. Sam, it's not like that. It's no one's fault if you chose a different path. You could have stayed, you could be at Pinnacle right now. Sam laughed lightly, but it wasn't irony. It was a kind of tiredness. Of course, I could have followed the rules, done what everyone expected. You guys celebrated every time Dylan turned in a new report. Every time he won an award, he had dinner at an expensive restaurant. I was just the daughter who texted him saying, "I'm going away again," and no one even asked where. His mother, Kathy, tried to soften the situation. You're siblings. There's no reason to turn this into a competition. We've always wanted the best for you. The answer came harshly, without giving any space. Stop pretending it doesn't hurt, Mom. You never cared about the commissioning ceremony. You never asked what each badge I brought home meant. The only thing that mattered was whether I was going to leave the army for good and get a real job. I heard every word. His father exhaled, as if looking for a way to turn it into a misunderstanding. Samantha, you don't understand. The world out there is different. No one survives on medals or pretty speeches alone. Sam looked him in the eye, his voice firm. I didn't survive on medals. I survived on merit, on waking up before sunrise, on leading a team when no one wanted to take responsibility, on facing real fear, not the fear of not delivering a report on Friday. Dylan lowered his head. He didn't even try to respond. Kathy slumped in her chair, fiddling with her rings, as if she could rewrite years of silence with a single gesture. Mike didn't respond right away. The silence became a wall between them. For the first time, no one had a ready argument. Sam didn't apologize, didn't try to force himself closer. He just made it clear, with every word, that the time for half-truths was over. Jessica Lynn, the CEO, was just watching. She didn't say anything, but she made sure to discreetly hold Sam's hand when she got up to leave. Sam left the room without looking back. She stopped in the hallway, leaning against the wall, feeling the weight slowly lift off her shoulders. The truth had been told. It wasn't about victory. It was about not letting the silence continue to eat away at everything inside. The emptiness of that hallway seemed bigger than the entire lobby. There, for the first time, Sam realized that she could no longer carry everything alone. There were things that needed to be said, even if it burned. The silence that remained inside the room was crueler than any fight. She could no longer pretend that no one was hurt, and what would come next could never be erased. Jessica Lynn didn't let the mood hang for long. She left the room after Sam, but returned before anyone could muster the courage to comment. She didn't excuse herself, just stood in front of Mike, her Pinnacle badge hanging from her collar. The project only exists because of her work. The contract was approved because she delivered what no one else could, and you're only sitting here now because of the choices she made. Her voice was low, not like a speech, but the kind that left no room for denial. Mike, who always asserted himself with volume and posture, sat small in his chair, his chin tilted, his eyes fixed on the reflection on the table. It was there, in that second, that his pride turned to dust. He stood there for a moment, his fingers intertwined, his breath shallow. He looked at Jessica, then at Dylan, until he stopped at Sam, standing in the doorway, as if he needed to hear something that never came. I failed as a father. It wasn't a one-line apology, not for show. It was a direct, heavy sentence, full of everything that had accumulated over the years. The silence weighed on him again, but this time in a different way. It was the silence of someone who doesn't really know how to fix what's already broken. Dylan tried to fill the empty space. He got up from his chair awkwardly, almost tripping on the carpet, and walked over to Sam. His face, always confident at company events, was tense. I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions. I should have tried to understand. It was always easier to follow what was expected of me. There was no hug, no soap opera-style reconciliation, just a direct, firm look, a nod from someone who knows the wound won't go away in 5 minutes. Kathy, perhaps on impulse, tried to justify herself. Things have always been hard for me too, Sam. I just wanted you to have an easier life, without so much struggle, without having to prove yourself all the time. Sam wasted no time. Respect doesn't come after success, Mom. It comes from the way you look at yourself, the way you listen, the value you give to each choice, even if you don't understand it. In the midst of the tension, Sam's phone vibrated. It was a short message from the other side of the country. General Teresa Boyd's name appeared on the screen, with just a few words that said it all. I have always believed in you. Your work honors each of us. Don't forget that. Sam read it silently and put the phone away. For the first time in years, the weight of his family's stares no longer hurt as much. Jessica gave the final message, in a way that only a leader knows how to do. You have the chance to build something new here, not because of awards or contracts, but because, perhaps for the first time, everyone was able to truly listen. Sam stood at the door for a few more seconds, absorbing every detail of that moment. His father's haggard face, his brother's attempt, even his mother's vulnerability, which he never let show. There, the respect he had always sought began to take shape, not because of status, but because she had finally shown who she was without having to hide her scars. But what remained now was to know if that change would really last, or if it was just another empty promise in the family. Time passed in a strange way after that confrontation. No one changed overnight, but each small gesture began to signal a real attempt at rapprochement. Mike was the first to give in. He sent a printed article in the mail, with a short note. You built this with your own hands. There is no one more qualified to teach us. That was unusual. Mike had always preferred silence to praise, but seeing his daughter's name in a double-page article, talking about leadership and innovation at the Pentagon, made everything more concrete. Kathy showed up at Sam's house on a Saturday morning, carrying a box covered in a blue cloth. She didn't say anything grand, just left the apple pie on the table and fiddled with her car keys, as if she was in a hurry, but didn't want to leave. Sam recognized the gesture. Ever since he was a child, apple pie had been his mother's secret code for admitting a mistake. Never a formal apology, but the biggest slice always went to the person who needed it most. That day, the first slice went to Sam, and no one had to explain anything. Dylan arrived one afternoon in October, walking straight through the back gate, carrying a briefcase full of reports and prototypes of Pinnacle's new system. For the first time, he asked his sister for her technical opinion without trying to be the boss. I used that security protocol you suggested, Sam. The feedback from the team was different after they saw the bugs fixed. The credit was recorded in the report. Full name, rank, everything is fine. Sam, who was always discreet, just smiled and asked to see the rest of the projects. They spent almost 3 hours reviewing lines of code, testing responses to simulations, each giving the other room to make mistakes without shame. The atmosphere at home was no longer a minefield of expectations. Family gatherings, once tense, became more natural. The jokes came little by little, along with small provocations, now without venom. Sam found himself, for the first time in many years, feeling that he belonged to this group, not only as an obligation, but as a choice. At the end of November, General Teresa Boyd's visit marked the final turning point. She arrived in uniform, sat at the table with the Harper family, and didn't mince words. Samantha has built a bridge between worlds that don't always see eye to eye. There are many high-ranking officers who wouldn't have the courage to do half of what she did here, and most wouldn't even be able to. Mike listened to every word. Kathy genuinely smiled. Dylan made a point of shaking the general's hand. No one there seemed out of place. Dinner that night wasn't just about food or celebration. It was the kind of gathering where no one felt obligated to prove anything. Sam looked around the table and realized that even though pride had come late, it had finally arrived. And this time, it was genuine. It came from the look in her eyes, from the mutual recognition, from the story she had built for herself, but that everyone was now keen to tell. Even so, she knew, some scars would take longer to fade, but the feeling was that, for the first time, the family had learned to see each other differently. Sam took the painting out of the wooden box, wiped the sides with a damp cloth, arranged the insignia one by one, and pinned it in the center. just the way he had always wanted. For the first time, he put everything on display in his living room, without fear of any nasty comments or nasty jokes. The uniform that had previously been folded in the back of the closet now occupied a place of honor, hanging next to the portrait of his military graduation from West Point, with the light from the window shining right on it, highlighting every detail, every medal, every stitch marked by time. Every time someone walked into the room, it was impossible not to notice. Dylan stopped by on a Tuesday night, brought a friend from the team, and before any conversation, he stopped in front of the board. He didn't just introduce Sam as his older sister. "This is Colonel Harper. Everything we develop goes through her review. It's the gold standard." Dylan's colleague was surprised, but Sam just laughed, remembering when his brother was embarrassed to admit that anyone in the family worked outside of Pinnacle's headquarters. Respect is no longer an exception. It has become part of everyday life. Mike, who used to talk only about business and contracts, began to use examples from Sam's career in conversations with the team. Kathy told her friends in the book club about her daughter's latest achievement without belittling or making excuses. Even the neighbors, who had always whispered about Sam's different choices, began to greet her in a different way, now with that tone that only appears when someone understands the importance of each achievement. The uniform became a symbol of autonomy. The insignia on display reminded everyone, especially Sam, that no external approval is greater than the certainty of having made one's own path. The routine changed without fanfare. Dylan asked for advice without arrogance. Kathy made sure to include Sam's name on invitations. Mike stopped to watch interviews and read each article to the end. In the room, each item on display carried the story of a battle fought out of the spotlight, each achievement sustained by the silence of those who never gave up fighting for respect, even when no one was watching. And that's how things got sorted out. Not by magic, but because after so long what was invisible became impossible to ignore. The painting stood there, silent, every day, showing that it was all real, and this time there was no one looking the other way anymore. Sam sat on the couch, staring at the painting with the insignia and uniform hanging next to the old portrait. It was just a room, just an ordinary afternoon, but now the weight of history was there, visible, impossible to ignore. Dylan crossed the hallway, stopped at the door, and looked at her sister in a way she had never done before. It wasn't just respect. It was a kind of silent pride, mixed with that regret of someone who knows they took too long to see. Sam no longer needed to say anything, nor seek recognition in every gesture. She knew, now more than ever, that the most important validation had always been her own. Now tell me, have you ever been forced to prove your worth to the people who should have been by your side? Write in the comments below. I want to know how you dealt with it, or what you would have done in my place. Stories like this don't just happen in boardrooms or impeccable uniforms. They happen in every family, every day, in the most real way possible. Comment here. Would you have the courage to show your true strength even though you knew no one was prepared to see it? I know this story touched you, because there's no way to go through something like this and come out the same. Everyone who comes here feels it. It's human. It's real. Leave your like now. It shows that you value stories of overcoming, truth, and courage. Subscribe to the channel. Here, each story is lived, told with the intensity of someone who was on the front lines, facing what no one else saw. Turn on notifications because you're already part of this. Stories like this change us, and they change those who watch it too. Now it doesn't stop. The next video is already on the screen, and what you're about to see challenges everything you think you understand about courage, family, and what it really means to survive the impossible. There's something waiting for you there. Something that will shake you up and maybe change your view of what it means to have to fight for recognition. The video is ready. Click it now. Come with me.